YouTube thumbnail game is on, and I'm your host CGR back with another episode. I design YouTube thumbnails and my life, and I'm here to learn and talk about one of the most interesting and important things in the YouTube business, the thumbnail. So let's get on with another episode. Today's episode is the background, episode number 19, and let's get into it. You are nothing without your family, friends, and the people you love. The subject we talked about in the last episode is nothing without an amazing background. The person's face is nothing big without what's behind them. If it's a split screen, the left is nothing without the right. The front is nothing without the back. If there's a subject in the center, it's nothing without what's behind him. Even if there's an empty background or a white background, that creates a composition that is really important for the thumbnail to convey some message or whatever the promise is. And in most niches, it's as important as the subject, if not more. The subject may be showing a reaction for say, but towards what? What am I? If I am surprised, what am I surprised about? If I am shouting, what am I shouting about? So the background, the complementary images, that are really important. It needs to be intriguing, and it must be exaggerated for most of the time in most of the places. It must be visible clearly. It must not be too cluttered, unless that is what you are aiming for. In general, in my experience, there must be enough white space between the objects overall in the area of the thumbnail. It is a fact. It is in fact a very delicate balance. Keeping, like, we always talk about trying to keep things as big as possible. Mr. Beast says do not leave space and make the faces bigger, make the text bigger, make everything bigger, as big as possible. But then we need to also leave space so that things can breathe there. Example, the text should be as big as possible, but it should not touch the borders. Then colors. Color must be, first of all, really clean, unless you are going for a dirty type of thing. In most of the cases, it must be clean as possible, so that it's clearly visible. Clean, like, depends on the niche we are talking about, but background colors must complement the subject or exaggerate depending on what you are targeting. In this case, darker or lighter. In general, I feel contrast is the main thing, and lighter thumbnails generally, like clean things, lighter thumbnails work better. Although many dark, like if image is dark and you cannot see something, that's whole another story. That thumbnail will generally will not work. But except if it's a CCTV footage and subjects are big and people can figure out what's going on in the picture. But in general, dark pictures will not work if you cannot see what's going on in the first glance. But I've also seen that glowing effects work really a lot if you do it really well. Everything works if you do it really well and you do it right. And there is no perfect magic. It's just, all these are just pattern recognitions that I have little bit developed over little amount of time. So there is no one size fit all. You have to see, observe, understand and experiment, because it often differs from channel to channel. Also within one channel, if you have different formats, it may differ from format to format. Sometimes I have got good results with darker background. Sometimes I have good results with lighter backgrounds, and sometimes the contrast is very, very high, the saturation is very high, and still I've got good results. And sometimes it's perfect and then I have got good results. Contrast, it's a term probably very overused. Every client will ask you to increase the contrast in thumbnail and the subject. To what does that exactly mean? So when someone asks you to increase the contrast, it means that the subject is not as obvious and clearly visible and attractive, something like that. So first of all, we need to keep the subject as big as possible. You don't need to keep the full chest area till the waist. Then we need to separate the subject and the background most of the time, and then remove the subject from the background, and then play with the contrast, increase brightness, saturation, and also blurring the background helps a lot. Like, it creates some kind of depth. And do not blur the background without removing the subject from that background layer. There is a subject layer which is being removed which has been cut out from the background, like the layer, and then there becomes a background layer. So you remove the subject with the generative fill and then make it blur. That is the way to do it. I like gradients a lot, and I kind of like have a thing for noise as well. I've seen it being used in very, very amazing ways. Textures are more important than I had previously imagined. I mean, I can transform an image to look like whatever I want with textures. Like, I can change the form of the image with textures. For example, I can make an image look like it's of a CCTV with adding some textures. And how will I know which texture to add for that? Just go to ChatGPT, explain the situation, and ask which texture you should be adding. And in most often, we can also ask ChatGPT how to make that texture inside of Photoshop filters only. Yeah, that is amazing. Next, Gaussian blur and pixelate mosaic. Gaussian blur and pixelate mosaic are one of the most used effects in YouTube thumbnail game to hide stuff. Tip and pro tip: increase the size of mosaic to around 20 and don't keep it too small. Initially I used to try to keep it small so that it will not be visible, etc. But I feel that now radius around 20 works the best, and I try to keep that. And the thing is that it hides the thing really well and also shows that what is present there without showing what is present there. Yeah. Background's job is to help convey the story of the thumbnail, needs to convey the promise that you're trying to make with your marketing. The background, whether it is dark, scary, haunting, if it's a split screen background, whatever thing that you are showing, whatever the clickbait element you're adding, whatever intrigue you're trying to add, that's the part of the background. You can also use stroke, outer glow, and drop shadow to separate the subject and the background. Rule of thirds: basic symmetry and aligning things to help make the composition look overall better, and trying to keep mostly a symmetrical background, and overall composition should be like symmetry, the text in the center. Like, these things are basic to manage, but there are always nuance, and you can always be better at whatever you're trying to do. If there are two objects, for example, in a product niche, you can use perspective wrap to make them more symmetrical. This is a game changer. Like, there are two images not exactly in the right perspective, so it kind of feels distorted and the symmetry is not perfectly right. So we can change the perspective of the angles of the image using perspective wrap and make them more symmetrical. That looks good. Like the subject, try to make the background viewable for small screens too. I told you that the subject must be as big as possible, and the background's objects, the elements of the background must also be as big as possible, so that people can see what can get a glimpse of what's going on in a smaller screens too, because as everyone already know, most of the users are of the phone screens. Yeah. Last but not the least, try avoiding stock pictures unless you are using like a plain empty background stuff. Most of the time in most of the niches, not real niches, real pictures work better than stock pictures. If there is no real pictures, try to find a similar scenario picture and try to place it in Midjourney and generate realistic pictures. Yeah. Then once you have the subject, the background, then you place a high pass with a radius of 10, around 10, 8 to 10 works really well, and then a hard light in hard light blend mode and adjust the opacity accordingly. This often gives the image the real sharpness it needs, and overall always makes the composition really, really good. I always use high pass and I will continue to use until I stop using it. Haha. So, if you like it, I have a request. Please subscribe. I will talk about the YouTube thumbnails here, share my designs and my experience, but more importantly, I want to bring guests and learn from them. For that, I need your support, and I promise I will sincerely repay it. Thank you. This was the thumbnail game brought to you by CJ Designs.